Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Adobo and Avocados. My name is Marie, and today I not only have one, but I also have the amazing Erin joining with us. But first, let's start with there you go. I got it the second time, yeah. So why don't
Yeah, yeah.
you introduce
I mean, there are
yourself?
only two
So-
directions, right? So,
yeah.
hi everyone. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven. I am Marie's sidekick, and I'd like to welcome Erin Crise to the stream.
Hello. Yeah, you got my name pronounced correctly. Good job.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Erin, for agreeing to be a guest with us today. We're really excited to talk about some really important stuff like advocating for accessibility and how empathy can drive innovation. But before we talk about all those things, can you introduce yourself? Like, who is Erin and what is it that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Erin. I am currently a senior test engineer out here in Kansas City, Missouri. I focus on desktop and mobile, manual and automation testing, and I've been doing this for about 14 years.
Wow, yeah. So in your current career, you said you focus on both desktop and mobile. Did you start focusing more on desktop, or you ended up doing both at the same time, or was it the
That's a
other
great
way around?
question. So when it first started out, it was mostly desktop, and then as mobile became more popular, of course, like we all kind of pivoted, and mobile was the main focus of any type of our testing. And now I would say it depends on like what project that I'm on, because sometimes like let's say the client has their desktop stuff already like ironed out, but now they have a mobile app. So we would probably take some of that desktop knowledge and apply it to the mobile stuff. And now we're, focusing on the mobile experience for them.
Awesome. Well, one thing though that we like to ask our guests, and we'll explain this to you in a bit, but the name of our live stream, it's Adobo and Avocados. You were sharing with us a while ago that originally you were from North Carolina.
Mhm.
So what is it that reminds you of home? So for us, adobo is like the national dish of the Philippines. And in terms of food, or it doesn't have to be food, it could be like an
It
activity
is
or
totally a food. Okay.
yeah, what is
Uh,
it that reminds you of home?
and it's so on brand for me. In North Carolina, there is this pickle manufacturer called Mount Olive, and Mount Olive pickles. Yeah.
Pickles. Just like pickles, or
Wow,
like with,
okay.
do you eat it with something else, or
Oh, I eat them by themselves, and I
oh,
drink the juice. I use the juice. I flick the
Wow.
juice on my sandwiches.
It makes it I don't know. I don't know how to describe the feeling, but it just the thought of drinking the pickle juice like makes me do funny things in my mouth.
yeah. uh,
I
my
love it.
I haven't tried pickle juice like with my sandwich.
It's good. It adds a little pickle to it. Yeah, it's great. I
Yeah.
recommend it. Try that and let me know what you think.
Yeah. Well, maybe when we ever visit you or visit North Carolina, you have to let us try
Yeah,
the
oh yeah,
pickles.
I'll send you some also.
Amazing. Okay, so moving on. Let's explore your career journey, because you said
Yeah.
you've been doing this for 14 years.
Yeah.
How did you end up with having a career in tech?
So actually, I thought I was going to be an artist. You can see some of my paintings behind me.
Oh wow.
I went to school because
Oh,
I
that's so
wanted
cool.
to be an artist, and I learned the hard way. Like starving artist is a real thing. That's a term you hear going to school and growing up, like thinking art's going to be cool. You starve. It's hard if you're not that you're not good, but if you don't get like the right audience and popularity and ability to like sell yourself and make money, you're
Yeah.
not going to make any money. And I was really not that good at marketing myself back then. So I fell back into like, well, what else am I good at? And my father has always been into computers. He was a computer systems administrator when I was a kid. So I kind of knew a little bit about computers.
Mm.
And I got my foot in the door at a company who they were like a medical billing clearinghouse that also made software. So I worked on their client support team, kind of like started at the bottom, worked in that role for a few years, learned the ins and outs of what software development life cycles are, what
Yeah.
different positions actually exist in a business. I had no clue that, QA was a job. I tested software for fun. I beta tested video games for fun. Um, but I got into this client support role, learned that there's like a thing called QA, and I got really good at it. And I just naturally was like asking the right questions and escalating the right issues and kind of bridging gaps all over the place. And we didn't even have a QA team at that time.
Mm.
Um, so I kind of helped them mold QA. And then I moved on to like my first real tester job, which was at Overdrive. And shout out to them. If you have a library card, you probably have their app on your phone. It's called Libby now. Um, I loved working there. And that's where my kind of um, blossoming and passion for accessibility came into play because I was testing our app for everybody, anybody I could possibly think of. And that's when I developed personas of, disabled people. What is it like for low vision? What is it like for, deaf? What is it like for limited mobility? How can I make sure this app is robust enough for everybody to use? And it kind of just carried that throughout my career. And then I've done a couple stints where I'm consulting or kind of helping small businesses maintain compliance. So I'll do like a website audit for them and give them a report. And yeah.
Nice.
I just wanted to comment on the fact that I think that it's a very natural progression because you talked about being a starving artist, and I think that occurs so often because as an artist, your work is about seeing something, seeing beyond what other people see. And sometimes you have to become a starving artist because people can't quite meet you at your level because you are seeing this thing that other people can't see.
Mhm.
But the same thing that makes you good probably at being an artist also makes you good at being a tester because as a
100%.
tester you're not just looking at what is, you're looking at what could be or what shouldn't be, just
Mhm.
kind of this out of the box kind of thinking.
Yeah, definitely has some intersection there.
Yeah. Because I was gonna say something similar. Because you obviously look like you came from a very creative background, and we can also see testing as an art, especially around exploratory testing.
Mhm.
It allows you to really be creative with your test ideas. So it does sound like you pretty much ported the skills that you already have and then use that to your advantage now
100%.
as a software
Yeah.
tester.
And I think our minds are wired very creatively. We kind of don't limit ourselves to the tools in front of us. We kind of create new tools out of the things that are in front of us. So we do that with art. I do. I do mixed media. I do abstract. I work with whatever is in front of me. And same thing with testing. If I'm approaching a project and I have a certain amount of time, maybe automation isn't the approach I should take, and maybe more exploratory and documentation is what I need to be doing. And then also communicating that like in that moment to the client and explaining like these are the risks, these are the benefits, these are our options, and I think this is what we need to do. And they're going to listen most likely because you're the subject matter expert.
Yeah. I really love that angle because this is where like it frustrates me when I see people they treat testing as like like as a checklist that that they have to complete. Like they're just content in ticking off boxes and making sure that their regression test cases are passing, and then they're not doing anything beyond that. That's one of my pet peeve, because it's really like an art, you know. You explore it like by wearing different hats, by using different personas. And if you're just solely focused in doing it the way that I guess traditional testers are used to, you're gonna miss out. You're gonna exclude
Yes.
a lot of users. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if testing were purely a science, then it would be entirely systematic and it would be a matter of checking boxes and there wouldn't be much room for anything beyond that. But the reality is that those are the purely systematic parts are the things that we automate, but as we know, not everything can be automated because you
Mhm.
can't automate away this sense of curiosity, this sense of I wonder what happens
Yeah.
if I press this button that wasn't, in the requirements.
Mhm.
There's that element of there's tapping into that really innate human playfulness that just can't be explained away by science.
Mhm. Yep. I definitely agree with what you were saying, that curiosity cannot be automated. And I love that. You should put that on a shirt.
Yeah. Oh, you should create one, Erin.
That's perfect.
Yeah. But I think now, because you've mentioned that it really made you curious about accessibility testing. It's also a topic that I've been passionate about, because when I was starting doing software testing, I have to admit I thought accessibility was done by
Mm.
a specialist. I didn't
No, it's us.
I wasn't doing it. Like I was only focused on like the functional aspects, like okay, does it really work? But then as I move on in terms of my career, and I've actually experienced a temporary disability because I had like a really bad sprain
Mhm.
um, on my wrist, and like even situations like when I was pregnant, I couldn't really use, for example, my mobile app. If it's like a big mobile, it's hard to use with two hands, but sometimes I would just like to use one hand because I'm
Mhm.
holding my daughter. So I didn't really got into accessibility, but the moment I started experiencing like how it is for people who are facing issues, that's where I started to see, oh yeah, why wasn't I thinking about this? I'm curious to know. I guess my question is, I'm curious to know, how did you end up exploring accessibility?
It was while I was creating personas for Overdrive's test matrix, where we developed the app. We had it localized, so there was, whatever language we had, like 52 languages you could have the app translate to and the content translate to. We also were looking into like specific dyslexic fonts. So folks that have dyslexia could read easier. And I was like, this is neat. We're considering some, and then also like high contrast that spawned from like wanting like dark mode,
Yeah.
which a lot of people were just like, I like dark mode, it hurts my eyes less, or it just looks cooler. Yes, that's true, but it was developed with these folks in mind.
Yeah.
It was those things. I was like, we are developing for this. What else is there and why? Like, what is all of these? And then who are those people? What type? How are they living their lives? I was very curious. Like, I discovered there's more than one type of colorblind. There's like four. And all of those actually impact individuals differently. And that's how they perceive the world. And I wanted to know what that was like. It was mostly I was exposed to it, and then I was extremely curious about it. And then I started recognizing I have my own disabilities that I could tap into and say, like, wow, I have I have dyslexia, I have tritanopia. There's cool settings in some
What
things
is
that I
that?
use that help me go through my day to day. So it's kind of a lot of curiosity.
What is that? Tritanopia?
Tritanopia, it's yellow blue. It's
Ah.
I turn it actually a video game that I play all the time. I talk about this video game a lot. It's called
Mm.
Destiny 2. And Bungie is actually doing a lot of really cool stuff for colorblind. They have different settings in their game for colorblind modes. I just think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to share. So when I was first starting my accessibility learning journey, is I really found this image striking, and this shows the differences between equality, equity, and inclusivity. So like if we focus on the like at the first image, you can see that there is a baseball game, and just to be equal, everyone gave people boxes, even like people who don't need one. Like the first guy, he was really tall, so he clearly didn't need the boxes. But just to represent that we're being equal, we're gonna give the same amount of boxes to everyone. But this doesn't really benefit everyone. As you can see, like the last guy, he still can't watch the video, not the video, but the game. So, in order to combat that, what they've done in the second image is they've given additional boxes to those who really need it. So now we can see that everyone can watch the game. They're still protected, that they can't really go through like the field, so it's also for their protection. But then if we think about this, there's that additional equity that someone needs to be there physically to hand out the boxes. And like if we think of that in like finance terms or like business terms, you're paying additional, you're basically like not wasting, but you're spending more money in this sense, because then you have to hire someone to be there. This person needs to hand out the boxes, so there's extra equity involved. And then the last image, like this is really good. Like, why not in the first place just make it see through? Like everyone can now watch the game. Like the wall is still making sure that it's protecting them, but now because it's been created with inclusion, with accessibility in mind, it not only benefits the really short person, but it benefits everyone. It's still allowing them to watch the game safely. So when I first saw this image, I was just like, yeah, like why not at the beginning? Why can't we just make sure that when we're developing things, it's including everyone, it's accessible to everyone? Because when we think from that perspective, like everyone really benefits when it comes to accessibility. I think that's one of like the myth that people have, is that when you develop for accessibility, it's only gonna benefit like a certain group of people. But if you think about it, it really benefits everyone. One thing that I do at home is I always put subtitles on no matter what. And it's because my daughter, she's loud, like she just likes to sing. So like if I'm watching something, I would prefer like, okay, even if I can't hear it, at least I can still read what's happening. But subtitles were originally created for people who are hard in hearing, but it benefits me even if I'm not deaf, or even if I'm not having that disability. So I really like this image when it comes to explaining the benefit of being inclusive in the first place.
I really like that you shared that image. I wanted to circle back real quick on the original question was, or part of it was, when you were a tester, the developers are who we kind of assumed, were baking in accessibility. What we learned in reality is that isn't the case. Unless accessibility is kind of like thought of and talked about, it's not going to be part of that scope of work. Your developer's not going to just do it because it's the right thing to do or because they're used to doing it. They kind of need to be told to include it.
Yeah.
And part of the tester's job is to kind of enforce that and champion it for the team. And I think now too, the developer advocates are doing the same thing by kind of making sure your developers, testers, any of your engineers are keeping accessibility in mind, like from the beginning of a project or as early on as it makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the sticking points for me, or one of the things that I hate to hear, is both the terminology and the divide between functional testing and non-functional testing. And the reason that that irks me so much is because as a performance engineer, my work is typically put in the non-functional bucket along with accessibility. But it just makes me really mad to think that an application being unavailable might not be considered a functional defect. And it's the same thing for accessibility. For the person who is deaf or hard of hearing, for a video not to have subtitles, that is a functional issue. It's not. I think when we put it under non-functional, it can come with this connotation that it's not that important. It's just a nice to have. Well, it's a requirement. It's very important for that person that does actually need it to be able to access whatever content it is. And I think that accessibility often gets that same bad rap as well, that it's the thing that you do after everything's done, when really it's just as functional as anything else.
Yeah.
I agree. And there's some, like, kind of by default, I think needs to be carried throughout. Like, while you were saying um, that, it made me think about a trip I recently had. I was flying, and there's in-flight entertainment, but there were no closed captions. And I was like, why is that? Like, you could go in, there was a setting for it, but none
Yeah.
of their content on board had closed caption. And I just thought that that wasn't fair. there's got to
Yeah.
be there's got to be a some basic, like, that needs to be there, even though it's just a movie or whatever. But that was one of my ideas.
Yeah. That's a really great example because, like, for example, like another example that I can think of is if you go to bars or pubs and it's a very loud environment, but like if they have, for example, news on, normally they would have the subtitles, right? So if you go to a place where they don't have the subtitles, you get that feeling of like being annoyed because, okay, what if you want to have a drink and at the same time like watch the news, but then you can't because you're in a loud environment. So just thinking about like all those different human behaviors that we have, because this is a really great thing about accessibility, is that there's no one user for everything. Like with the requirements that we are doing, if we're just focused on like the very basic functionality, we are gonna miss out a lot of the user personas. And doesn't even have to be for example, people with visible disabilities. It could be invisible disabilities, it could be temporary ones, it could be like situational, when like it could happen. So like it's just um like I think at this day of age, if your company is not thinking about accessibility, then you are excluding a lot of users, and maybe they're going to like competitors, or they are dropping your websites quickly if they find that the colors are very difficult to see. There's animations all over, fonts that are difficult to read. And one thing that I just learned, I didn't realize this before, but apparently if your texts are not left centered, some people, for example, might have difficulty reading it if it's just like centered aligned or right aligned. And if the words that you're using as well are not very simple words, that could also be classed as something that's not accessible. So it's just really interesting because these are like day-to-day situations that we experience, and it's crazy like why weren't we thinking about this before?
Like the more you learn, the more you're like, why?
Yeah.
What? What?
Yeah.
What? Not what is wrong with them, but like, what
Yeah.
is wrong with them?
Yeah. And I might be showing my age here as well, but I know there is like a correlation between aging and disability, but I have very poor eyesight. And like if I browse a website on a mobile and they don't have a mobile version, like you have to zoom in
Hmm.
really really like too far in, and then once you're zoomed in you have to like scroll to the left and then back to the right, and then it's
It's
just
kind of
so,
awful.
yeah. But then people don't think about that, but then when you start to experience it, then you do.
Yes. Yeah.
I think when we're thinking about accessibility, one of the topics that we have to cover as well is inclusivity, because they're the same sort of problems, right? Because everyone wants to be inclusive, but one of the major hurdles is that in order to be inclusive, you actually have to know who you're including. You can't just say, everyone come in. No, inclusivity is about extending an invitation to specific types of people. It's not just a free for all, because that's not necessarily inclusive. And that's where it gets difficult, because no matter, what intersection of identities you have, you're not all of them. So there's always something that you're going to miss out on. For
Hmm.
example, I have a YouTube channel, and sometimes I like the color red. I'm like in pink now, but I was once, I got a comment because I like to use red on my thumbnails as well, and I didn't realize that the shade of red that I'd picked was very similar to the YouTube red. And someone commented that it was very difficult for them to see, like, if it in a 10-minute video they'd watched 5 minutes of it. You know how YouTube shows like the progress bar in red? Well, when
Yeah.
it's overlaid on top of the thumbnail, it then becomes really difficult for them to see which
Yeah.
videos they've watched and not watched, or where
Or how
they
far I've
picked up
watched
from.
one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and that was something I never would have thought of.
No. Now you're saying it, I'm like, nah, duh. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it seems so obvious when it's pointed out.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well,
um
also thank you to them for pointing it out. Like
yeah.
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
folks just get over it, or they go through life being like, I'm used to it. And I'm like, no, you can advocate for yourself. Speak up.
Yeah. One thing that I found really useful, because maybe Erin, you can share with us as well, because when I was advocating for accessibility on like previous projects, it was easy to share to them what tools to use, what accessibility tests we can automate, what things we have to really check. But then the buy-in, like at the start, especially from stakeholders, it was so difficult. It was so difficult to create that culture change. And one thing that I've always advocate for is Microsoft Inclusive Design. They created this really handy diagram just to group all the different disabilities, because there's a misconception, like I said a while ago, that when we speak about accessibility, it's only catering the ones on the permanent column.
Hmm.
But then if you see here, there is temporary one, and then they show you examples of, okay, what might be a example temporary situation
This
that
is an
might,
excellent
yeah.
source.
And it's so funny because, yeah, like if you speak, yeah, what if you have laryngitis? And this is really I think the heavy accent, I've read before that there's some controversy here, but to me, like, I think this is useful that they've included this, because sometimes what if you're trying to watch a show, but then someone has a heavy accent, so having some sort of closed captions or subtitles will really help you understand that person, until you can
100%.
understand that person fully. And it's just so useful because I think if someone is not aware of the impacts of accessibility, showing them these diagram to say, but look, we're not just only catering for the set of disabilities. We're gonna also be catering for everyone if we are accessible and inclusive.
I
I
wonder
really
if
like that.
we I wonder if we should be using a different term as an industry rather
Mm,
than accessibility, because when I think accessibility, it makes me think that it is about the point of access, of something being obtainable, of being able to go to the site or being able to download whatever content. But the reality is it's actually broader than that, because you might be able to access something but not be able to understand
Consume.
or comprehend it. And
Mhm.
that is also important, and that is also a functional issue. So I don't know. I don't know what that word would be, though. Maybe it should be like inclusivity testing or something.
Yeah, we'll have to wordsmith something.
yeah, I remember I saw a thread on Twitter and one person recommended that, hey, instead of using non-functional or functional requirements, we'll just call them quality attributes. And I think that
Oh,
has an import that has a really nice ring to it, because it makes you realize that there's more to one quality attribute. From a functional perspective, there's also the accessibility, the security, the performance, the user experience. And I think that's a much better way of framing things, rather than having that divide of, like you said, Nicole, functional versus non-functional.
definitely.
But yeah, I wanted to ask, so Erin, how was your experience in terms of like convincing
Oh,
people
yeah.
to really think about accessibility? Because I had not really a major blocker, but I remember that was one of the most difficult things, is how can you convince someone to think about accessibility?
I think that I had a unique experience in discovering, learning, and then kind of um, implementing testing for accessibility because of Overdrive. It was part of their software development lifecycle, which is rare.
Yeah.
Accessibility often, it floats around. It's not part of the flow unless you really kind of make it that. But I have worked on projects where I recognize like let's say we have a client who has an existing platform and they want a new one, new shiny thing. I'm going to look at their old one and kind of learn some things about it. And part of that discovery may be that they're actually not accessible. I can't tab through gracefully on this page. I can't get to a checkout screen. I can't do certain things. Color contrast, font size, you name it, they're failing all over the place.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take this knowledge into this new project with, in the discovery week where we're kind of thinking about the technology, the tech stack, and how we're going to integrate things. I'm going to start talking about accessibility there. And I'm going to say, here's all the reasons why we need to be considering this now. And then the developers are going to keep that in mind. The designers are going to keep it in mind. The product owner is going to make sure it's part of the acceptance criteria. And as the tester, we're going to, do our due diligence and make sure it's accessible. So my experience has been kind of, I know what's good, I know best practices, and then I kind of so far have had great success in making sure that it's every project I've worked on, it's been a part of. And it's not hard. And I don't know if it's because I'm enthusiastic about it or I'm very convincing and I have enough supporting documentation to prove things, but it's always accepted and part of our projects.
I think we talk a lot about shift left in general as a movement. And I think when people talk about shift left testing, a lot a lot of the assumptions around it are that testing should be done in parallel with development. And while that's true, I think you can shift left even further and actually shift it left into design. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's only designers that should be thinking about accessibility, but we can, as testers or as developers or engineers in general, use the principles of design thinking,
Mm-hmm.
of that idea of rapid prototyping, or or just thinking things through from that higher level perspective, like a bird's eye view, and already thinking about things like accessibility.
Yep. Yep. I've been in teams where design and development and testing is kicking off on a project at the same time. And if you think about that as the tester, you're like, well, what am I going to be doing? Because there's no design and there's no dev. There's no front end, there's no back end, there's no API. How am I going to spend my time? What is going to be the most useful thing for me to do? A lot of times I'm going to pair with that developer, or I'm going to pair with our designer, and I'm going to plant seeds of we
Yeah.
should think about all of these things. And then as those designs are getting looked at by stakeholders and some of those designs are getting approved, so we know that's going to the developer eventually, I'm going
Yeah.
to start writing test cases based on that design and get some stuff kind of ironed out. And there's lots of little ways. It may not be like a traditional agile um, way of working, but because you're kind of all over the place, but once you're used to it and you kind of step up and you look down, you're like, that made sense. All of those little things made sense.
Yeah. But I think this is where we can argue because one model that really has stuck with me over the years is we have the continuous like the the DevOps model, for example, where it's like a continuous approach, but then like one of the limitation of that model was where is testing in that model.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dan Ashby created a variation of that model where he mentioned that testing is found at every stage of the life cycle. So whether you are testing the design, testing the code, or once you're in production, you test via observability or you look at the logs.
Mm-hmm.
And it really shows that, and I like the thing that you said that it's all over the place because it really is. Testing is all over the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Not the stage, but it's like all over the place. And um, you can really even shift it further by testing the ideas, by testing what the actual proposal is from the stakeholders. Like if there is a brand new greenhouse project that they are going to pilot, then you as a tester, I think you can have that voice to say, okay, have we thought about people from these persona?
Mm-hmm.
So it's great that you are thinking that approach because I think that's the way forward. Like you should really have that holistic view of what's happening.
Ah, you said the word.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
love that you mentioned that, Marie, because I'm sitting here because I always have my notes open when we're having a conversation so I can bring up things that I, of course, don't remember at the moment, but I have, read into. And look what I've got just here.
Yeah.
I've got this is the diagram that Marie was talking
Yeah.
about from Dan Ashby,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Yeah.
love that it's a play on it where it's just we test here, here, and of course here, and here, of course.
Oh, and don't forget, yeah.
Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like I feel like because I've also created an article but focus on performance, but I still reference Dan's image, and I've been to like different conferences where speakers have also used his model as a reference. So I love that it's creating that impact because
Mm-hmm.
it really should be that like testing should be all over. It doesn't have to be like after the stage or after a certain code has been deployed to an environment and that's only when you can test. Like why can't you be creative and test right from the beginning, speaking with the stakeholders, sharing with them some concerns that you might have. I think that's part of testing because you are challenging ideas right on from the start, and that really helps to build an inclusive product because the more diverse ideas you've been sharing, then I believe those will all be taken into consideration, and then you're also thinking about the rest of your users right at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I also think this is where shift left falls down because
Yeah.
the whole concept of left implies that this is linear, that there is a
Yeah.
beginning, that there is an end. And I think the testing shouldn't be. and isn't an activity. I think testing is an attitude. And I think our job as testers is to cultivate that attitude of curiosity. I think we need to lean into our innate diversity and really champion the diversity of others. And that's where I think empathy really comes in for a
Mhm.
tester, right? Because more than any other type of role, testing is the role where we need to be putting ourselves in the shoes of other people, whether that's the end users or even the people that we're working with.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
empathy is the whole empathy drives innovation is that uh, we see it as folks that are carrying empathy kind of on a daily basis in our work. We're empathizing for developers. We're empathizing for the end users. Like, and I carry that in my personal life. I'm caring about my coworkers. Like when we do a retro at the end of a sprint, sure, I care about the work that we did, but how are you? Like, how did you handle this sprint? Like, here's a feelings wheel, and we're going to be vulnerable. And you might be down here in the dark area where you're stressed out and nervous and freaking out, but it isn't about work. But we have this space for you to share, like, this is happening. And that's like having that part in like your day to day for work is, I think, just as important as getting the results and getting your job done is caring for your peers.
I really love that because that's really something that we don't normally do as part of retro. We just talk about things that have gone well, but from a project perspective. And I think having a space where you are safe to share what is it really that you're feeling.
Mhm.
If, for example, you have an idea, but then you feel that it was rejected, then having a space to voice that
Mhm.
um, really makes a difference. And we had a previous episode before with Callum where he spoke about the importance of not having a monoculture because that's one of like a really negative like that has a negative impact if you only have one way of doing things, if you only focus on um like developing or testing for a certain group of people, then what about the feelings or what about the requirements of others? That's
Mhm.
also equally as important.
This
Yeah,
goes
that.
back to the question of art versus science, right? Because someone who is very focused on the science part of it might think, oh, okay, I don't really need the empathy part. I can just have a checklist. Okay, Marie, so what do you do when you go to the application? All right, now what? What do you click? And how do you feel about this? And it can just be very dry.
Mhm.
And I think if you look at it in terms of that, in terms of a checklist, then it's very easy to miss out on things. Instead, if we focus on caring first, then you have genuine curiosity about this person who might be using your application. And from there, you are naturally going to ask some questions. And you're also probably going to steer the conversation in other directions that you wouldn't have foreseen. But I think that essential kernel of a tester's job is this ability and willingness, not just willingness, but a longing to connect on a
Yeah,
on a deeper level with whoever it is that is in front of you.
totally. You said that so well.
Yeah. In terms of creating that culture shift, I remember I was reading this book by Regine Gilbert on like really how to um, make sure that everyone is on board with accessibility and inclusive design. And one thing that she mentioned that's always been stuck with me is it really takes the whole village
Yeah.
to in order to have that impact, because if it's only you as a tester advocating for accessibility but then the rest of the team aren't doing their part, then you're not gonna do so well in terms of the actual activities. Like a good example that I can think of is, let's say you work in a product team where you've enforced that, okay, these are the accessibility requirements that we have to, and you've tested this as part of testing or stage environment. So an example is when you write an article and that article has images, and you as a tester have added alt text, but then if the actual editors who are using your application in production, if they're not adding alt text to the images, then the effort that you try to make sure that it's accessible, it's not really gonna end well, because the people who are writing the actual articles aren't even adding the alt text themselves. So this is why it really takes a whole village. From your perspective, have you done like certain exercises with team members, just
Yes.
sure that it's not only you who's
Yeah.
thinking about it?
I really love this question because it gives me a reason to talk about empathy sessions, which at Crema, which is the company I work for out here in Kansas City, we they let me do something called an empathy lab, and it was we actually put it up on YouTube. I took them through disability simulators to kind of put them in the shoes of these other users. So we use this tool that I've used many, many times called funkify.org. And we got to see dyslexia, colorblind, and I think maybe some other vision impairments, like what cataracts might seem like. So I do that for many reasons. One, immerse yourself in the experience. See what it's actually like, maybe for somebody else to read our whole web page or some site and be like, that experience was interesting. Maybe we should reconsider the shade of green and red that we're using right now. But what that also does is it further kind of we recorded it and put it out there, but we had the audience of other people at work kind of observing this empathy lab, and it made them curious. Yes, that's it. It made them curious about what we were doing. So then once that was over, they're like, can we do one? Can we try? Can we try the other different disabilities simulations that they have in here? And then can we come up with our own? And what is that like? You know, can we make some ADA version of a disability simulator in the real world? You know, put a blindfold on and try to get yourself a glass of water and see how successful you are, just to experience what that might be like. So not only are we experiencing this, they're taking this kind of discovery back into their work and making sure it's just kind of part of the culture now where everybody cares about it and we all make sure to follow best practices from our developers to the designers to the testers to the CEOs. Like they'll
Yeah,
talk about accessibility because it's part of what we do.
that's amazing. I,
Yeah.
I I love that you're using that to really simulate the different disabilities, because like we were talking about a while ago, you really start to think about accessibility once you've experienced it.
Yes.
It's not something that you now take for granted. But I know one of the questions that people might have, especially when they want to get started with accessibility, but um I have to be honest, the first time I looked at the web content accessibility guidelines, there's so much text. Like I don't know, it's just so difficult to understand every single thing. So what would be your advice to, I guess, people who want to get started, because
My
there's a lot
favorite.
of things.
Oh,
Yeah.
there are so many tools. You know, there's so many tools, and it kind of changes depending on what project, what tool makes the most sense to use, and kind of sometimes it's just a preference. But the one tool I will always recommend for newbies that want to like just get something to experience how to test for accessibility or what can they start looking for that isn't just a bunch of text like on the WCAG's website, Wave.
Yeah.
Chrome extension. I think it's supported on other browsers too, but Wave is awesome because it shows you the stuff in real time. It shows you the site or the page you're looking at, and it's going to show you like any like miss issues on the page, and it's intuitive. It comes with instructions. Like every time you visit it, it's kind of just very user friendly, and I would say Wave, definitely 100%. Yeah. Um, it does a great job at educating the user on the different levels. So you got A, double A, and triple A, which are the different levels of, uh, what am I going to say?
The severity level.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
in most places it's double A, like that's going to
Yeah.
be the basic level you want to hit, um, and and this website sets it to that, so you can kind of take let the tool do some of the heavy lifting for you of hitting through those guidelines and then erroring on the page, and you can inform and read, learn about contrast errors or what whatever might be wrong with the page. But yeah, that's a good one.
On the topic of the empathy sessions, I'm also going to suggest something maybe a little bit out of left field. I think that one way, and you already touched on this, but I think we undersell the value of play in general at work. But in particular, I
Yeah.
think role playing is very good for developing empathy. It's kind of like
Oh yeah.
exercising your empathy muscles. So
Yeah.
I play tabletop role playing games 3 times a week. And I think that empathy really comes from a wanting to understand, a wanting an experience and a practice of routinely putting yourself in somebody else's mind.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the book Ready Player 2. It's like the sequel to Ready Player 1, which was turned into a movie. And it's sort
Yeah.
of this high-tech dystopia where everything is virtual. And one of the things that struck me in it is that because there was some technology where you could not just watch a video or a movie, but actually feel what that person is feeling.
Mhm.
And a side effect of that is that it actually increased empathy because you are in somebody else's shoes and you
Oh,
feel all the sensations that they're feeling. And I think that there is a way that you can role play at work. It could be as simple as, the thinking hats, Edward de Bono, and
mhm.
you can have a hat that is more rational. So that person, when you have that hat on and they suggest actually having that hat, you think only about the facts and is it reasonable, is it logical? But there could also be, accessibility
Mhm.
hats. There could
Yeah.
be like a hat for hard of hearing, someone who's hard of hearing, or the single mom hat, or different hats like that. And
Mhm.
that's just kind of I think that role playing could be an extension of those customer empathy sessions.
Oh, definitely. There, as you were telling that story, I just memory unlocked an experience we had about a year ago. Um, you know how companies will have like holiday party week, and maybe part of that is like everybody comes to the office and we do all little activities. One of them was like groups got put together, and I got to be the product manager, and I got to think like the product manager and kind of like talk to this group like the product manager and how I would have approached a project. And I thought like it was actually kind of neat. And another part was we were practicing feedback, so it was like feedback loops, and there were scenarios of like, okay, this scenario, I'm going to be the PO, and I'm going to tell you like you're not really meeting some expectations on a project, and I kind of want to understand why. And it was to kind of dig into what is your immediate reaction going to be. Are you kind of trying to make an excuse for yourself, or are you going to kind of step up and hold yourself accountable? And in doing that, you're going to also be a little bit of vulnerable, and you're going to be more genuine in a response. And that like taught a bunch of us kind of we don't have to be afraid to be vulnerable, and we can tell our truths, and it's not going to hurt us, kind of. And it was kind of actually very useful.
Yeah. I love those 2 points. And I totally agree from the perspective of the different thinking hats, and in your case, Erin, like you are doing another role that's not your typical role, because it really immerses you to really think about, okay, if I am this person, what are the things that I'm gonna have to do. One thing as well that I like we've never fully implemented this, but on a previous project that I was part of, we wanted to like gamify the idea of accessibility. So I've tried to create like this idea of, okay, maybe as part of like this day we only use our keyboards, and then like how many accessibility issues have we actually found, how many stuff did we not able like are we not able to access because like the tab numbers aren't really in the correct format. So there's a lot of different ways that you can gamify it, and I remember buying a bunch of like stickers to say that, okay, this person found the most number of accessible bugs, and then you can have this sticker. So there's a lot of creative ideas that you can try and involve your team. And I know someone from the Ministry of Testing community, AD Stokes. He's also a big accessibility advocate.
Mhm.
And one of the things he shared was, yeah, you can just have a day where why don't you just access everything with your keyboard, access your favorite website, and see how painful that
Oh
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
I will do something similar. In most places that I work, if we have Slack or Microsoft Teams, I will create a channel that's for accessibility related content, information, safe space, all of those things. And then usually it'll be, I'll try to have an incentive, like you want to gamify, who finds, some accessibility bugs. It'll be an incentive of like, if you do this, I'll make you an emoji, whoever wins. And then now there's a Slack emoji for, you know, Katie, because she found like the most elusive accessibility bug. So yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I guess like in because I know there are accessibility overlay tools that really sell themselves that, okay, if you use our tool, then your website is gonna be 100%
I
accessible.
hate them.
I was gonna ask, like, what is your stance? What is your feeling? Yeah.
I feel like I have a similar stance as Crystal Pretzel Watson. She has posted several times on her distaste for those overlays, and I feel like they do more harm than good because they're not accessible in themselves.
Yeah.
What if you can't see it to begin with? To click the little the little icon of the accessibility guide that opens up that overlay, and some of the stuff that are in them, I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
really, yeah.
I think another thing that we can do to create a culture of accessibility is to hire for diversity in the first place.
Hmm.
I think that there's only a certain amount of empathy that there's only a certain part of the way that empathy will take you, because no matter how empathetic you aren't that person and you don't have their experiences. So if
100%.
we take take the extra step of building a team that is diverse, and by diverse I don't mean, they can't be white men. I mean whatever experiences and races and just personalities that you have on the team, when you look to add to it, think about what they're adding culturally as well.
Mhm.
Mhm. I love that you said that, because I also really advocate for in user testing, having disabled users, actual disabled users, not me pretending that I can't see. I need a blind person to test this app for me. And there are safe places to go in and actually work with those people. There's a lot of accessibility communities on Slack, on LinkedIn, on Meetup. So we'll outsource some of our testing to these users as much as we can that makes sense to do. which
That's
is pretty neat. Not a lot of companies will invest in that.
Yeah. I was gonna comment, Nicole, that's similar to the analogy that we did with the lab and field data a while ago. Because, like, we can look people with actual disability to be our field data, because they're
Mhm.
probably using a screen reader so advanced, like so different from how we try to use a screen reader. So no matter how many like scenarios we've tried to check for accessibility, so this could be our lab data because this is things that we can control of, there are things that only a real user with some form of disability getting their insights, it can really have that additional value of, oh yeah, I didn't think of doing that
Mhm.
when I was doing my testing. So there's so much value in actually getting people in with disabilities to test your applications.
To note one on that topic, there is a feature in TikTok that I don't know a lot of people know, like the story behind why it is actually there. If you hold the image or if you hold a video down, like while it's playing, and you kind of just press on the left side of the screen, you can change how fast it plays or
Oh,
reads, like the speed. And most of the time, that feature is for blind users because they take information in at an incredible rate, much faster than we do, folks that can see. Uh, they can take that audio in way faster. And that's how they develop those two features of speeding up
wow.
the video and the audio.
I didn't know that. That's such a cool, cool, nifty feature.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, we are out of time. I feel like we can talk a lot about accessibility.
that went by
And
so fast.
yeah. But in terms of the last question that we have for you, Erin, what is your advice to women or underrepresented groups who want to have a career in tech?
um, as gently as I can say, reach out. Hopefully, you are comfortable enough to hear this message from folks who are open to receiving you. So reach out to the community, to other women in tech. I will tell you, I get messaged all the time. And I take those messages seriously, and I will point people in the right direction, or I will mentor them myself. But what I would say is, lean into the community, lean into folks that are willing to help you and get where you want to go. I think, Marie, you've helped me on occasion get into conferences and in other ways. And Nicole, I know that you've got a background in helping others get into tech. So I think any one of us would be a good start, but we also have a great network of folks that um, will help too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Erin. It's been really great having you with us. And I think by having your insights and really talking about the user empathy sessions, how it can really generate like different ideas, I think that's really an additional like heuristic that people can add into their testing toolkit. So I'm
Yeah.
sure people will find this episode really useful, especially if they really want to look into accessibility. But yeah, for now, we are done. I think Nicole, we are back, isn't it? For our next episode.
Oh boy, back to back.
But no, no, we're gonna be recording it this week, but we're gonna publish it next week.
Ah,
So I look
okay,
forward to that. But
cool.
yeah, thank you so much, Erin. I hope you've had a really wonderful time chatting with us
This
and
was
sharing.
great. Anytime you want to have me back, yeah, anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And
Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
okay. Thank you all. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.
Bye.